The Russia-Ukraine war has gone through multiple phases since it first began in 2022, but the idea of a turning point is something that both military experts and ordinary observers have debated for a long time. To understand what really changed the course of this war, we need to look beyond just one event and instead see how a combination of military, political, and strategic shifts altered the balance of power between the two sides. What may at first look like a simple clash of armies is in fact a story of logistics, technology, alliances, and the will of nations under stress. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion, the expectation in Moscow was a quick victory. Russian forces advanced toward Kyiv with heavy firepower, assuming that Ukraine would collapse politically and militarily within weeks. But the resilience of Ukraine's forces and society, combined with significant intelligence and logistical support from Western allies, prevented that from happening. That initial failure by Russia was the first crack in what many thought was an unstoppable offensive. Kyiv held, Russia had to retreat from northern Ukraine, and the narrative of a quick war turned into a prolonged conflict. As the war dragged on, both sides began adapting. Ukraine shifted from a defensive posture to more coordinated counteroffensives. This was made possible by the influx of Western weapon systems, particularly precision-guided artillery such as the HIMARS rocket systems. These systems allowed Ukraine to target Russian supply lines, ammunition depots, and command centers deep behind the front lines. For a war that had been fought largely with traditional artillery duels and infantry advances, this change in technology forced Russia to rethink how it operated. Suddenly, no rear area was safe, and Russia's heavy reliance on massive stockpiles close to the front became a liability. Another key turning point came with the battle for Kharkiv and Kherson in late 2022. Ukraine launched surprise offensives that retook large swaths of territory, demonstrating not only military effectiveness, but also psychological momentum. For months, Russia had been trying to project strength through attrition warfare, counting on its larger population and resources to grind Ukraine down. But the speed and success of Ukraine's counterattacks showed that Russia could be outmaneuvered, and it forced Russian troops to abandon strategically important areas. This was the first time the world saw Ukraine not just defending, but reshaping the battlefield in its favor. However, wars are rarely defined by one side's success alone. Russia also adapted. Following its losses, Moscow announced a partial mobilization, bringing in hundreds of thousands of new troops. While many of these soldiers lacked training and modern equipment, their sheer numbers allowed Russia to stabilize its positions and continue pressing forward in some sectors, particularly around Bakhmut. The battle for Bakhmut itself became symbolic, not just for the territory, but for the psychological and political weight it carried. Russia threw in Wagner mercenaries and regular troops in waves, while Ukraine used the city to inflict massive losses. Though Russia eventually claimed the city, it was a Pyrrhic victory that drained manpower and resources, while Ukraine prepared for its next moves. Another major shift was the entry of advanced Western tanks, air defenses, and eventually promises of fighter jets. The introduction of systems like the Patriot missile defense, Leopard 2 tanks, and long-range Storm Shadow missiles gave Ukraine capabilities it had not possessed before. Each of these weapons was not just a tactical advantage, but a strategic signal that Western commitment was deepening, and Russia could not simply wait for support to fade. Still, these deliveries were slow and often limited in number, which meant Ukraine had to use them carefully, choosing when and where to strike. By mid-2023, Ukraine launched its much-anticipated counteroffensive in the south and east. The expectations were high, but the realities of modern warfare made progress slow. Russia had months to prepare dense defensive lines, complete with trenches, minefields, and layered artillery zones. The Ukrainian advance faced enormous challenges, and while some breakthroughs were achieved, the sweeping territorial changes many hoped for did not materialize quickly. This period highlighted the difficulty of offensive operations in modern warfare, especially against an entrenched opponent. At the same time, it showed how much wars of attrition depend on logistics, morale, and technological superiority, not just on troop numbers. The turning point, therefore, is not a single battle, but the cumulative effect of these shifts. Russia failed to secure a quick victory. Ukraine demonstrated its ability to strike back, and the international community's support reshaped the battlefield. Meanwhile, Russia's reliance on mass mobilization, energy leverage, and strategic patience became central to its war effort. The war turned into one of endurance, where both sides were betting that time would eventually tilt the balance in their favor. Another crucial factor is the role of drones and electronic warfare. At the beginning of the conflict, drones were used for reconnaissance, but as time went on, both sides began deploying them for direct strikes, surveillance, and disrupting communication lines. Ukrainian innovation with cheap, commercially adapted drones allowed them to challenge Russia's larger, more expensive systems. At the same time, Russia developed heavy electronic warfare measures to jam or disable these drones. This back-and-forth technological competition has become a defining aspect of the conflict, changing how modern wars are fought. Geopolitics also shaped the turning points. Sanctions imposed on Russia were designed to cut it off from global markets and weaken its economy. While Russia managed to adapt by selling energy to Asia and developing parallel trade routes, its long-term access to advanced technology was restricted. On the Ukrainian side, Western aid was not only about weapons, but also financial and humanitarian support, allowing the state to function despite the devastation. The turning point here was the realization that this was not just a regional war, but one tied into global energy security, food supply chains, and the very architecture of international alliances. As the war continued into 2024, the element of endurance became even clearer. Both sides sustained heavy losses, and neither achieved a decisive victory. What emerged instead was a war of attrition that increasingly resembled conflicts of the past, such as World War I, where front lines shifted slowly and casualties mounted. Yet unlike the wars of a century ago, this conflict involved advanced precision weapons, cyber attacks, and global information campaigns. The ability to control narratives and influence international opinion became nearly as important as battlefield success. So when we talk about the turning point in the Russia-Ukraine war, it isn't a single date or a single battle. It is the moment when the war shifted from a short, decisive campaign into a drawn-out struggle where resilience, alliances, and technological adaptation mattered more than sheer firepower. Ukraine's survival against overwhelming odds, combined with Russia's recalibration and Western involvement, turned what began as a regional invasion into one of the most consequential conflicts of the 21st century. The front lines may change, but the deeper shift has already occurred. The recognition that this war is shaping the future of global security, military strategy, and the balance of power in ways no one fully anticipated at the start.